Good evening and welcome to Q&A live from the Dockland Studios, Melbourne. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, Industrial Relations commentator Grace Collier, the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, David Oliver, the Minister for Rural Health, Fiona Nash, Shadow Minister for Health, Catherine King, and leading Melbourne broadcaster, Neil Mitchell. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live to air on ABC TV, News 24 and News Radio across Australia, so all Australians can be part of that national conversation. We've got some great questions tonight. Let's go to our first one. It's from Kate Sutherland.
We have been told the GST is dead and buried, and cremated for that matter, in the past. What assurances should we take from this Liberal PM's recent statements?
Neil Mitchell, we'll start with you.
The Prime Minister promised economic vision. He said the one thing he would give us is economic vision, and he hasn't. He's given us a denial. Can you believe him? Yeah, I think you can. I don't think he's got the political will to take it on, even if he should. I don't think he's interested in tax reform. He's just looking at the next election. If he wins that, anything could happen, perhaps even a GST.
Neil, you've seen the business lobbyists out today and they're alarmed. They say this is the end of reform pretty much. It destroys the hope of personal income tax cuts and corporate tax cuts. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's the end of reform. I think it'll be fiddling. He's talking about fiddling superannuation. He's talking about fiddling in various other areas. I think it's the end of any hope of genuine tax reform. Mind you, who would trust him on the GST? You can have a GST provided you get the balancing cuts in taxation or genuine tax reform. Even Costello and Keating are agreed we need to cut spending. That is the key issue which Malcolm Turnbull has not yet addressed. OK, Fiona Nash, the questioner wants to know if Malcolm Turnbull has effectively killed off the GST or not. What's the answer?
Well, firstly, now, completely disagree. The Prime Minister is very focused on economic reform, so I completely disagree with that. What we have, and just one second, what we have is a Prime Minister that's prepared to take a debate about tax reform to the people, not make a call to actually have a grown-up, sensible, rational debate. So, as you well know, there are a number of things on the table at the moment. The PM has indicated he's yet to be convinced by some of those options on the table, and we'll continue to discuss it with the Australian people, with the economists, with people in the community, and amongst both sides of politics.
So Fiona,
that's just a sensible way to go.
He wasn't ruling it out when he ruled it out?
Yeah. Well, he said the evidence wasn't in, so we are still clearly looking at all the options. But it's about getting jobs.
It's still an option.
It's about getting jobs and productivity. The Prime Minister has clearly said today he didn't believe the evidence was there. We will continue working through the reform process to make sure we've got a tax system that gives us jobs and delivers growth.
A week ago, the evidence was there. He told me in an interview, oh, this looks like the way to go. That's effectively what he said. Within a week, he's changed his mind. Yep. He's gone to water. Where's the vision?
I don't think
months.
effectively that was what he said. I think he was really clear saying everything was on the table, and it's quite right for him to take it to the people, take it to the country and have a grown-up debate about it.
OK, I'm going to bring in Catherine King. Now, I suppose from Labor's point of view, you'd be grieving if it's true that it's off the table.
Well, no, for the people of Australia, we think it should be off the table. We've been saying that consistently right from the get-go when this was brought on for debate. And remember, this is, it's felt like this debate we're having like a Seinfeld episode. It's a debate about nothing. On the one hand, you've had Malcolm Turnbull saying, oh, no, we want to talk about everything, but he doesn't actually want to give anyone any details about what it is he's thinking about. I think there is no doubt the only thing that's changed in the last week is some pressure from backbenchers and he's electorally nervous. After the election, he will absolutely do this. This is what they want to do. And I would disagree with Neil in my view is that tax reform isn't about the GST. In fact, I think that's a pretty lazy reform. It's about looking across the spectrum and actually looking at some of the other areas, which we've already done.
Well, either of you talk about spending, for heaven's sake. I mean, this is the key to the whole thing. We're spending far more than we're earning. You can't have tax reform until you do that.
OK, I'm going to expand it out to hear from the other panellists. We'll come back to you in a minute, Fiona. Grace.
Well, Tony, look, I do agree with what everybody else is saying. We've gone round and round the mulberry bush a few times. What I find a little bit comical is that when Abbott was in, they wanted to do spending cuts and then nobody would tolerate that. So we couldn't have that. Now we've talked about GST, well, nobody wants that either, so we can't have that. So now nobody knows what to do. So we're all sort of standing there going, oh, well, gee, we can't cut spending and, oh, we can't raise tax, so, oh, what are we going to do? So at some point, somebody has to stand up and be a grown-up and make a few recommendations.
You mean like Paul Keating, who
Yeah.
suggested a 20% spending cut, $90 billion?
Well, I'm with Paul Keating. I've worked with many people in and out of the public sector and aligned with public sector. I have lots of friends in the public sector. I know lots and lots of people. I work in the business sector, and there is massive government waste. Everywhere you look, there is fat to be cut. We have so much fat, we could start our own obesity clinic. I mean, there's so much government waste and nobody wants to talk about spending, but I think what we would like to see is politicians leading from the front. Now, I used to work in cost cutting and we used to handle distressed businesses that were on the verge of bankruptcy. And the first thing that management would do would stand up and say, we're taking a 10% cut to our salaries and everybody else has to take a cut too. So you have to lead by example. So what I'd like to see is the politicians taking a massive cut on their own entitlements, not doing any more of these silly overseas tours, which we all know are just a rort, and leading by example. They can tighten their belts, they can give away some of their conditions, and then they can ask the rest of us to do so with a little bit of moral authority.
Let's go to Dave Oliver. Grace Collier said she's with Paul Keating, who suggested the GST is unnecessary because you can cut spending instead, which is what Neil was saying a moment ago. Are you with Paul Keating?
Where I am, and I think the reason that Malcolm Turnbull's had a change of heart is he's actually picked up what we have picked up in the community and workplaces talking to our members, that they don't support the idea of another tax slug. I mean, the fact that a cleaner, a fact that a cleaner at Spotless pays more tax than the company itself is telling. If you want to fix the taxation issue have a look at the top end. Don't always go down to the lower end. And if you're talking about cuts, what spending cuts are you going to do that affect the most vulnerable? I mean, I don't accept it's not acceptable that you've got the big end of town, corporations, that aren't paying their fair share of tax. And in the GST debate, it was suggested we'll increase the GST and we can use that to cut the corporate tax rate. Well, you know what? I'd be very happy if the corporations in this country are actually paying the tax that they're supposed to pay now.
All right. Let's hear a brief response from both of our politicians, starting with Fiona Nash.
Thanks, Tony. Well, firstly, if we're talking about savings, perhaps maybe talk to Labor about the $5 billion worth of savings they're blocking in the Senate that were actually their own to start with, that they're not letting through the Senate. And I must say, I get a bit sick and tired of Labor and Catherine and others saying what the government's going to do. They don't sit in our party room, they don't sit in our ministry, they don't sit in our cabinet, they don't know what we're going to do, and they just try and scaremonger.
You haven't told us. That's the whole point.
They will jump out there and scaremonger. Constantly, and they've got no idea.
Economic
what
vision,
we're going
where
to
is
do.
it? He promised it 5 months ago when he rolled Tony Abbott.
What the Prime Minister promised was to have a grown-up discussion
We're having a
with the
debate about
Australian
nothing.
people.
What are we having a debate about?
That's your opinion.
bring us
It's not
Okay,
true.
you've got 30 seconds. I'll
All
bring
on
it
the
over
table.
to you to respond because Labor's been brought into the conversation here.
Yeah, well, look, certainly it is absolutely clear that the government wants to introduce a 15% GST tax on everything. It is absolutely
rubbish.
clear.
That is
it
just
is absolutely
a lie,
clear.
and you know it.
It is absolutely clear
It's
that is what
rubbish.
you're going to do.
Can I just
and
ask
that's
one
what
quick
you want
question?
to do.
Was it rubbish before the weekend?
Yes.
What did she say? We're not
Exactly.
going to
For the
do it.
last poll. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go to, so I'll let Catherine finish her point and then I'll go to our next question, which is also on tax, so we'll be able to expand
well,
on it.
certainly it is clear that that's what the government wants to do. They have put the states in a position of starving them for funding for hospitals and for education. I think they're in all sorts of pain over this, and I think we're all going to pay the price for it.
That is also incorrect, and I'd like to address that later if I could.
Okay, you'll get a chance. We'll go to our next question. It's from Ian Haynes. It's also on taxation. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks, Tony. I'm one of the fortunate senior Australians who are moderately asset rich. I'm also happy to accept all the perks and handouts that the government gives me. But given that we now have a structural budget deficit and that we, as you've just said, need up to $90 billion in spending cuts, and given that a GST now appears to be off the table for the present, do Catherine and Fiona and the rest of the panel believe that our nation can still afford to allow me and others like me to pay no capital gains tax on our primary residence, to have share and investment portfolios and property portfolios negatively geared, and to pay no tax at all on the earnings from our superannuation funds.
Let's start with Neil Mitchell, since he raised the issue of spending earlier, but this again is about taxation now.
Yeah, it is about taxation. The spending issue, and I just get back to what the two politicians are saying, is about funding hospitals, it's about funding schools. Our hospital system's a disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace. Do you know we've got people waiting 4 years in Victoria to see surgeons? The Royal Melbourne Hospital's collapsing, and we sit here arguing about how we're going to do it.
Neil, I can promise you we'll come to that issue.
Okay, all right. Is it justifiable to change negative gearing? Well, if you do it, it's got to be prospective. It can't be retrospective, so you're not going to get the money in quickly. If you're going to fiddle with superannuation, the same thing applies. You can't be retrospective because you've put your money into superannuation under a certain number of rules. And we're still talking about peanuts, effectively. What 150 billion a year, the welfare bill? I think we bring in $9 billion in super fund fees, something like that. It's fiddling around the edges. Now, all right, I think we have to get used to taking a lower level of welfare, and obviously that starts at the top, not at the bottom. You've got to have the safety net at the bottom. We have to get used to a lower level of welfare and this belief that the government owes us something. Now, I don't know how you change that mindset, but we're not getting anywhere near it at the moment with the debate that's going on.
All right, I'll come back to Fiona Nash now. GST pretty much off the table, even though the conversation is continuing. Capital gains on houses, the single dwelling, negative gearing and superannuation tax breaks for the wealthy. Are they going to be part of your tax reform agenda?
Well, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, Tony, no matter how much people might like me to, about what the government's going to do. But what I will say, and the PM's been very, very clear about this, is that it's got to be fair. It's got to be fair, it's got to create growth, and it's got to create jobs.
Well, let's go back to our questioner. I mean, are you concerned that it's taking such a long time to get actual answers to the sort of questions that you're asking? I mean, politicians find it hard to predict what tax reform is going to look like, but obviously you find that frustrating.
I just find it. I just want to give the government some courage. I want them to do something. We've got to start somewhere. I just want Australians want something that's fair, and I think that people like me can afford to contribute our share. I think we all have to contribute. I don't think we can get back to balance unless we all contribute. And I think the poorest contribute according to their means, and people like me contribute according to their means. But I think we all have to contribute. I just want the government to get their courage, to do something to get started.
All right, let's find out.
I don't want them to fluff this chance.
Let's find out from the one representative of the government we have here, Fiona Nash. Does the government have the courage to do serious tax reform, having already taken off the biggest item from the table?
Of course we do, but we're not going to go ahead with any taxation changes that aren't of a benefit. What would be the point in that? That would be stupid. So we have to look at right across the board what the options are, look at what is going to create more jobs, what's going to drive more growth, what's going to encourage people to work, save and invest, and then make the decisions accordingly. But I'm not going to preempt what the government's tax reform agenda is going to look like.
Dave Oliver, briefly, does the union movement want to see major taxation reform?
Oh, we do, and actually I want to commend you for the position that you've actually put. It is refreshing to hear someone in your position to say we want a fair system and everyone should pay their fair share. It's a pity we don't have more people like you heading up our corporations in this country.
Okay.
Can I just say something there?
Yes, go ahead, Grace.
I take what you're saying, Dave, but unions are tax exempt. They don't pay any tax. So perhaps if unions paid tax too...
Well, we're not for profit.
Well,
we don't make, Grace, we don't make profits.
Well, as we've seen from the Trade Union Royal Commission, you're all pretty good at spending money.
Grace will come to the Trade Union Royal Commission on those issues.
Now,
remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda. Keep your eye on our Twitter account for fact checks by the Conversation and the ABC fact-checking unit. Well, the next question comes from Zoe Breitling.
On Friday, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews sent an open letter to the Prime Minister informing him that Victoria is able to take in 267 asylum seekers who are at risk of being returned to Nauru. This includes babies who are born in Australia. He claimed that sending them back would, quote, needlessly expose them to physical and emotional trauma. Other state and territory leaders have since said the same, and rallies are being held in capital cities calling for the asylum seekers to remain in Australia. When both politicians and the public are opposed to returning them to Nauru, why is the federal government refusing to listen to the electorate?
Okay. I'm going to start again with Neil Mitchell, and I want to just get your sense of what the public sentiment is on this issue. Obviously, you've seen the Victorian Premier step into the story, as we've just heard.
Oh, that was a stunt from the Premier. No, he knows it can't and won't happen. It was a stunt. I think the public view is horror that children of any age are being kept in these sort of facilities. But there's also a fear and there's a degree of concern about trust. I mean, we've had, nearly 1 million refugees to this country since 1945, but times have changed since boatloads turned up from Europe and were welcomed and everybody is relaxed and happy about it comparatively, because there is this element of trust now that's to do with security in this country, and that's now the additional complication is that the model has worked in stopping the boats coming. Now, I've never seen so much misinformation as I have on this whole issue. You know, 100 million a year, I think the estimate is that it's costing in welfare payments for refugees, 97% unemployment rate. These are the things that we've got to debate and analyse when we're talking about spending and taxation and security. It's awful to see kids being kept in that way, but we've got a broad responsibility of the country as well in handling it properly.
And very briefly, to go to the question, you say it was a stunt by the Victorian Premier. What do you think should happen to those children and their families?
I don't think there's an option to send, other than to send them back. And I think that's horrible. I think it's horrible. I feel bad about it, very bad about it. But I can't see an option. I interviewed a people smuggler a year or so ago from a jail cell in Indonesia. And I said to him, if we stop them and handle them offshore, what does that do? And he said, that destroys our whole model. They'll stop coming. I didn't believe him, but it was right.
Catherine King.
Zoe, thank you for the question. I know many people are in the position that you are in and feel very strongly about this. I think the challenge, and I think one of the issues for us is that we have got ourselves into this, and I suspect Fiona might go here, that, you know, Labor did this and Liberals did this. I think where we are today is that we have people on Manus and Nauru who are seeking resettlement. The policy position and the policy settings are that that resettlement will not happen in Australia, and Labor has agreed to that. But what we should be doing, and I am amazed that the government has not actually started to engage in this debate in this way, is that we have to engage properly with the UNHCR. It's why we committed some $450 million to say we actually want to increase Australia's efforts in this, to actually look at credible third-party countries. We can't have a situation where we're sort of muscling up to the UNHCR and saying, you know, we don't want you to dictate what happens here. We have to engage with them. As hard as that is in terms of the policy settings we've got, we can't just set and forget for the people of Manus and Nauru.
So very briefly,
we've got to do something about resettlement.
Catherine King, those children and their parents who are here now, since the High Court decision, basically under threat of being sent back to Nauru, should they be sent back to Nauru? Do you agree in the end with Neil Mitchell?
I agree with the policy settings we currently have, as difficult as that is. I also think that we have to make sure. I do want to say a couple of things. I do think it is important that those people are safe. I do think it is important it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. I don't have those case files, so I think that is important as well. It is important that those people are safe, but the policy where we are today is that we've got a broader issue about what are we going to do about credible third-party country resettlement for those who are on Manus and Nauru, and we've got to
and very briefly, because you haven't actually spelled it out,
sure.
You believe they should go back to Nauru in the meantime?
That's correct.
Fiona Nash.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Zoe. I'm a mum and my heart goes out for this situation. This is a really, really difficult situation. But what we've got here is a situation, just to respond to Catherine, we are in discussions with other countries about third-party resettlement. But this is a really, really difficult issue. What we have done with the policies that we've got, and I'm pleased that Catherine supports us in those, is that we have now a situation where we have put the people smugglers out of business. So that means, because of that, we can now bring in the 12,000 Syrian refugees because we've done that. But what we've got now is the very difficult situation of these children being in detention. We've been really clear that we're going to look at that with compassion and on a case-by-case basis, and that's exactly what we're going to do. There were just let me finish. This is important. This is important. There are 1,992 children in detention in 2013. Now there's 75. That's still too many. Our aim is to have none, and that's what we're going to continue to walk towards.
Okay. Just very briefly, you say on a case-by-case basis, that's what I wanted to pick you up on. So some of those cases will not be going back to Nauru, is that right?
I'm not going to give an indication. I'm just going to very clearly say to you that this will be dealt with compassion, and we will, as the PM has said, look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Dave Oliver.
As a father, I ask myself this question, and I appreciate it is a complex issue, and I agree we need to look at a regional solution. But I ask myself this question: could I take the hand of a child and lead them up a gangplank, or put them on a plane to send them back to Nauru? And I couldn't. And I couldn't expect anyone else to do that. And Neil, I don't know. Are you prepared to actually take the hand of a child, to put them on the plane, to send them back to Nauru? Because I cannot comprehend that for a minute.
I can't comprehend it either. Yeah. But I can't comprehend people dying on the way here the way they were. I mean, that is a very important emotional point you just made, but it is not an answer.
But they are here.
It is simply an emotional point.
They are here now, and we have a decision either to look after them or take children and put them in an area where they will be vulnerable. And I can't accept that. I can't accept it under any circumstance.
Grace Collier.
Look, Tony, it's a very difficult subject and it isn't my area of expertise, so I did a little bit of ringing around today, and my understanding is that there's 1,000 people on Nauru and there's 1,000 people in Manus, and the people in Australia are the ones who've come over to receive medical care because they've either been sick or they've self-harmed, and it's also a relative that's travelled with them. So there is a real concern if we allow them to stay. How does that incentivise the other 2,000 people who could put them in the horrible position where they feel that they might do something unspeakable in order to get here too? And then you take that circle out wider and you look at where that goes beyond there. So it's not fun, and it's not wonderful, and it's horrible, but compassion is one thing, but then you've got to look at the compassion to an individual and then the compassion to hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people behind that individual. And I think that's the struggle that we all have, and that, look, there's just no easy answers, and I don't envy anybody that works in that area, because it would be an awful thing to do, to send anyone back, but I think it has to be done. All
right, let's move on to another controversial topic. Our next question comes from Adam Lambert.
Thanks, Tony. The Prime Minister has said that implementing the recommendations in the Hayden Royal Commission's final report would make unions stronger. What steps should be taken in order to strengthen the union movement and give union members greater confidence that their union fees are not being misused?
Neil Mitchell, I'll go back to you to start.
Oh, thanks. You need a policeman. The policeman needs to be independent. We have policemen in all forms of life who are independent. For some reason, the union movement seems to reject, in the building industry particularly, the prospect of an industrial policeman. I get first-hand reports of the thuggery that happens within the building industry in this state. 25-year-old man the other day turns up for work. They wouldn't let him on the site until he came out with $500 to join the union. Come on, that's illegal. It's not a closed shop. You can't do that. There are examples of this. You need oversight. You need policemen. The union movement is struggling. It may be dying. I hope not, because I think we need it.
Don't write us off yet, Neil.
Well, you don't make any profit. What else?
That's the answer.
It needs monitoring and controlling, and the Royal Commission has shown that. It might have been set up for political purposes, but that doesn't mean you can dismiss what it's come up with.
So, Neil, just very briefly, are you restricting your comments about the policemen to one single union, the CFMEU, and one single industry, the construction industry, because that's what the ABCC is set up to do?
I think that's the worst. I think we deal with that. We're making a good start.
Dave Oliver.
And thank you for your question. And my goodness, I didn't think I'd find myself agreeing with Neil on your point to saying that the Royal Commission was set up for political purposes. Spot on. You know, it's exactly
Doesn't mean it's wrong.
It's exactly what we knew it was
Doesn't
set
mean it
up
wasn't
for.
needed.
And the way we characterised, you know, it was a tale of two commissions. So you've got a Royal Commission which is designed to try and diminish the capacity of the union to go out there to defend workers' entitlements. At the same time, Productivity Commission's been established. And look at the recommendations coming out of that. Once again, going after the pay packets of workers. Recommendation number 1, going after penalty rates for workers in this country. Now, I have to say this, Royal Commission, it spent around about $60 million. It went back 30 years. It had over 500 witnesses. And at the end of the day, they came up with a handful of matters to be referred off. Now, I have to say this. I am appalled by corruption wherever it is, whether it's in the Labor movement, whether it's in politics. We got another front page story today about a Liberal MP, possibly acting in a dishonourable way. We've seen stories about what happens in the sporting arena. We know what happens in the corporate world. And that's why the union movement, we have backed the call to set up a National Crime Commission to weed out corruption wherever it is. Now, Malcolm Turnbull, he wants to use a spear on his political opponents. We're saying if you're serious about cleaning out corruption, if you have zero tolerance for corruption, use a net and back a national crime watchdog to oversee not just the union movement, but all aspects of life where corruption exists.
Grace Collier.
Well, look, I think the union movement can't have it both ways. If they want to, have one corruption body that oversees all companies and all unions, then unions need to become companies. They need to be subject to the same governance standards and they need to pay company tax. At the moment, unions are set up under the Registered Organisations Act. They're not set up under the Corporations Act. So unions and employer groups are set up under the Registered Organisations Act. They're tax exempt. They have very lax governance standards and they're subject to, I guess, different requirements. So that's why they need their own workplace corruption regulator. It's not, the ABCC is not really a corruption body. It's really a regulator for activity in the workplace space. Going to your question about making unions stronger and giving union members confidence back, and I think that's really important because I used to work in the union movement and I believe we need unions. The only way to make them stronger is to make it illegal for companies to financially transact with them in any way and introduce some more governance standards.
Right, can I just interrupt there for a moment? Are you talking specifically about the kind of thing the Commissioner Hayden focused on, particularly with Bill Shorten, but other unions as well, which is the payments made in kind or in terms of employing people during negotiations for workplace agreements?
That's right, yes. Tony, look, the reality is, and as I said, I've been there, it's hard for unions to recruit members. You've got to walk up to somebody in the workplace and say, hello, my name's Grace, would you like to join the union? You can imagine what most people say, right? So it is actually hard to recruit members. Now, a lot of unions have fallen into practice with companies where the companies will recruit for them or they'll just give them the money. And this needs to be stopped. Unions need to be incentivised and encouraged to actually represent their members and only stand for their members, only take their members' money off their members and only just do the job for their members. Don't have secret meetings with employers, don't take money from employers, don't give training to employers, don't have businesses with employers, don't have little funds with employers. Just look after your members. And if they just looked after their members and only took money from their members and put all their emphasis into doing that, I think they might be stronger.
Dave Oliver, I'll quickly get you to respond to that, but I want to hear from the other panellists. But what we're really talking about is secret deals made between unions and employers that the workers didn't know about. You oppose that, don't you?
I've always, as long as I've been a union official now for over 30 years, it's been very clear that any kind of transaction should be transparent. And there are plenty of situations where, and you might find this hard to believe, Grace, I think it's been 20 years since you've been involved in the union movement, but we do work cooperatively with employers, particularly around key industries. We will do joint work. I come from the manufacturing industry, and some of the most significant economic transformations that we saw back in the 80s, we managed through that because we had employers and unions working closely together with government. That's why we had a steel industry, that's why we had an auto industry. So, and a big key part of that was investing in training and skills. Now, Malcolm Turnbull wants to talk about innovation and the future. Well, a key part of that has got to be about education and training, and that's where the union movement works in closely with employer organisations to provide training to support our industries, have industries that grow and prosper.
Come on, we all know that the registered training authority stuff, all that training, it's rubbish. You're training people to get certificates in, you know, doing stuff that they already do.
Well,
that they've been doing the job for 10 years and they get a certificate 3 in doing the job you've always done. Look, yes, companies and unions shouldn't be at loggerheads, right? They shouldn't. Of course they shouldn't. We don't want conflict. Work cooperatively with employers. Just don't take their money. Cooperation shouldn't be bought. It should just happen because, you know, it happens. It's just like you don't have to take their money. You should only take money off your members. That's who should be financing you, not employers, not, you know, dodgy businesses set up by employers. And look, Dave, this is the whole problem. You don't have to listen to me. I'm just one person saying what I'm saying. But I think, you know, the numbers walking away are telling you the tale. You know, we have a family business that's an industrial relations business. We only represent employees. That's all we represent, right? So I'm not some mad employee-hating, anti-union person. And do you know the
Your
amount
words, not mine, Grace.
This is the way you guys like to paint me. But, you know, the amount of people that ring up that business seeking assistance, and they're always asked by the call centre, are you a member of the union? And because if they are, we say, go back and get them to help you. Do you know the amount of people that say, oh yeah, but they've done a deal with the manager, they're in bed with the bosses nowadays, they've both together done a job on me. The amount of people that say that is astonishing. I don't work the phones, I don't work in the business, but I get the feedback and I find it heartbreaking. So you can talk about cooperation, but unfortunately it's become collusion.
I'll have to wind you up there, Grace.
So can I just say, but I mean, people, you know, I've been reading the premature, you know, announcement of our death for quite some time. You know, we are one of the biggest membership, we are the biggest membership-based movement in this country, 1.8 million workers, and people are joining us. You know?
Well,
so
good, I'm glad. I wouldn't begrudge that.
So don't write us off. And you know, plenty of cases.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to hear from the other panellists on this issue, and particularly the one that Neil raised earlier, which is around the ABCC, and go to Fiona Nash first.
Thanks, Tony. We want to see respect for the rule of law, and we want to see increased productivity, and we want to see increased growth. Now, people might not realise that in the building and construction industry, since 2012, the days lost to the action that's been taken is increased by 30% for industrial action.
That's not right. That's wrong. It's wrong.
My understanding is, well, you can say it's wrong, but it is actually correct. So with the ABCC, Tony, what we want to see is we want to see a stop to unlawful strikes. We want to see a stop to unlawful picketing. We want to see a stop to coercion. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, can we get the facts?
Can I just interject there about the role of the ABCC?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to give Dave Oliver a chance just briefly to respond to that. Then I want to hear from Catherine King.
The opposite is the case. When the ABCC was disbanded, the number of industrial disputes actually dropped. It almost halved. When the ABCC was in place, I tell you what increased. Workplace deaths and accidents had increased. That's the result of the ABCC.
Okay, I want to hear from Catherine King as well, because we haven't heard from you on this. And I will make one point, though, on the issue raised there by Fiona Nash. Terence Cole, former Royal Commissioner, says that since the ABCC was disbanded, billions of dollars have been lost in productivity to the economy.
Well, I think he's absolutely wrong, and I think that, there's some real question over that statement. I think the issue with the ABCC and the way in which the government has re-established it again is that it has incredibly coercive powers. I mean, some of these powers are powers that we impose on people when we are questioning them for terrorism-related offences. I mean, the powers that this ABC is supposed to have, if we want people to be treated equally in this country, if we want to have a fair democratic country, the ABCC, frankly, goes well beyond what anybody should be prepared to accept happens to people purely because they are in their workplaces doing their jobs, and we can't support it. We cannot support it. Nobody wants to see corruption anywhere, whether it is in the union movement, whether it is in our business sector.
So how do you take it on?
No one does. We have
the legislation.
we have very strong powers already. We have a crime commission which has very strong powers already. We have had discussions already, and Dave has raised it, around, do you look at a national corruption commission? We've sort of toyed with the idea. We've said we think there are enough powers within the existing system to actually deal with it. But we don't want corruption anywhere.
Now.
It shouldn't
They're
just
not
be.
working now.
You don't have to be
be
anti-corruption and at the same time anti-union. And unfortunately, that is where the government has gone with the ABCC.
Very quick question. The union's proposing a national crime commission, or a commission that would deal with not only unions but with a whole series of other things, as he said. Labor opposes that. And I'm just wondering if that's because New South Wales Labor was burnt so badly by ICAC.
Yeah. No, it's not because of that at all. And I think the Liberal Party's probably had a overwhelming experience on that side as well. But really what we've said, federally, there are existing organisations that already have powers. So the Crime and Commission already has the powers of a Royal Commission. We actually already have that at the federal level. If they're not resourced, if that's not working, then we need to look at that. We think that would be the first line. But we haven't ruled it out. We'd certainly have a look at it.
Haven't ruled it out, okay. No. Neil Mitchell, I'll give you the final word on this subject.
Fix it. Somebody fix it. The system, we talk about being cooperative. It's all about jobs, isn't it? It's about getting jobs. It's about building the economy. It's about
well-paid jobs.
I mean, you keep knocking corporate Australia. For a start, if you stop doing that and work with them, you might create more jobs and you might make the economy humble.
Neil, I work very closely with a lot of the corporates.
All you've done is bag them here tonight about how they're fat cats.
Bill Short.
But I think, Tony, the whole thing about the ABCC, and this is what I find really hilarious, everyone's arguing about the ABCC because they think it's anti-union. In fact, the main role of the ABCC is to enforce a code, and the code does not even apply to unions. It only applies to companies. And that's what it's about. The reason that corruption in the building sector is a big problem is that we are now the most expensive construction destination on the planet. Every hospital, every road, every train line, every apartment, every school, we pay at least probably 30% more than we should. Now, we don't do that, we don't pay that because the workers are getting more in their pockets. We pay that because Australia's largest builders collude with the unions to price fix and control markets. So when
Grace.
a very...
That's the evidence.
Industrial relations is a big debate, and we've got another question. We've got several questions, in fact, which deal with another part of it. First one's from Mary Ann Lowe.
Hi. I've got a lot of 18-year-old staff members that earn up to $38 an hour on a Sunday in the hospitality sector. We've had to increase the costs of running weddings and events and saw us have a decrease of 1/3 of our events last year. We lost 17 events because we had to put the price up on Sundays. Lower rates would mean more jobs, certainly in the wedding and event sector. I'm not saying to rip them off at all. Even on a Monday to Friday, they earn $23 an hour as a casual as an 18-year-old. With a level 3 hospitality worker earning over $38 per hour on a Sunday as an 18-year-old, how is this considered a lowly paid worker?
Okay, I'm just going to make the point you are a Liberal councillor as well as a businesswoman.
No, I'm not a Liberal councillor. I am a councillor, yes.
Okay.
And I am a member of the Liberal Party, yes, but I'm not endorsed by the
Okay, all
Liberal
right,
Party.
sorry. Okay.
I'm not endorsed by it.
Fair enough, I'm glad you clarified that.
The Liberal Party is the party I vote for.
Yeah.
They're not a party I participate in particularly actively, but yes, I am.
Okay, fair enough. Catherine King, I want to start with you because Sunday penalty rates are definitely going to be a live issue this year.
Absolutely, there'll be a live issue this year. It is taking money off low-paid workers. It is not something that we can support. These are workers not just in the hospitality sector, they are our nurses. They are people in our emergency services who are working at 4 a.m. in the morning sometimes. It is not something we can support. You know,
I think you'll find that I think you'll find the government's plan is to take emergency workers, nurses, doctors, firemen off the.
So where do you draw the line? Why you know who is more valued than others in terms of the wages that they get? This is about attacking the wages of low-income workers. It's not something that we can stand for at all. Here you've got a government that is not prepared to look at the issue of multinational tax. It's not prepared to look at the issue of superannuation with high-income earners, yet it is prepared to put on the table that it wants to cut the wages and the living standards of some of the lowest paid Australians, and we can't stand for it.
All right, I'm going to go to a question on this subject before I bring in the rest of the panel. It's a slightly counterintuitive one. It's from Andrew Morris.
I'm a student, and for the last 5 years I've worked part-time in the hotel industry. From Monday through to Saturday, there are 2 shifts in the upstairs bar and 1 shift in the bottle shop. On Sunday, there is 1 shift in the upstairs bar and the owner works in the bottle shop. When will Labor and the unions realise that Sunday penalty rates are hurting the average Australian worker?
Neil Mitchell, start with you.
I agree with him. Over Christmas, I was out in regional Victoria. Places were closed. In holiday areas, they closed on Boxing Day because they couldn't afford the penalty rates. The pub wasn't open on Christmas Day for their traditional Christmas meal because they couldn't afford the penalty rates. You don't want to rip off the pub worker, of course, but if you're going to have small business in particular thriving, growing, creating jobs, you need that balance, you need that cooperation, you need a fair wage, and you're talking about a 7-day industry. Really, if you've got a 7-day industry with a 7-day world, almost a 24 hours, 7 days a week world, I think you have to accept there has to be a negotiated situation where they get fair wages, a fair deal, but you can still grow business.
Dave Oliver?
Yeah, I'll take up on your point about a 7-day world, and I often hear that quite a lot coming from
people who don't work.
Political opponents and sectors of the business community that want to go after penalty rates. And the reality is this, that we still have 70% of the workforce that work Monday to Friday. In this country, we actually value our weekends. So our work life is centred on a Monday to Friday week. Now, I'll buy the argument that we're moving to a 7-day society when we can send our children to school on a weekend, play our major rugby league or AFL grand finals during the week, or perhaps Parliament might decide to sit on a weekend. Now, penalty rates are there to compensate people for working outside ordinary hours. And like you, Neil, I mean, I'll walk down my local shopping strip on a Saturday and Sunday. Some businesses are open, others are closed. Those that are open, some are doing a roaring trade, others maybe not. It's not dependent on whether or not they're paying someone the penalty rates. It's the nature of business. And I have to say this, if the business community were successful, or the current federal government, and we saw the reduction or abolition of penalty rates, it could turn out to be the biggest own goal in the history of small business, because people who get penalty rates are the ones that are spending money in those businesses. It would take billions of dollars out of the economy and it would hit regional areas. And a recent report that was prepared by a number of unions, the McKell Institute, showed that millions of dollars would be coming out of particularly regional areas if you reduced wages of workers. That's less money in the community being spent in these small businesses.
Let's hear from Fiona Nash. Now, the government is clearly looking at this option of changing Sunday penalty rates. It seems that, as we said earlier, emergency workers, nurses, firemen, police are off the agenda. Hospitality workers, like the people being talked about here, are on the agenda. Are they not?
Well, what we're clearly doing is listening to the views on this. I get both sides of this issue raised with me consistently. What we've also been really clear about is that rates are a matter for the Fair Work Commission, as they should be.
Yeah, Tony, I think this is again another one of those myths. There's a process in place at the moment by the Fair Work Commission to look at whether penalty rates on Sundays should be cut. The government that put that in place was the last Labor government. The last Labor government inserted a provision into the Fair Work Act. Bill Shorten moved it to allow the Fair Work Commission to cut penalty rates where they feel they want to. So if anyone out there's penalty rates get cut, it's not Malcolm Turnbull, it's the last government that have put that in place. I think this government's been quite clear that they're not touching penalty rates, that they're a matter for the Fair Work Commission. And do you know what? I think that's probably the smart thing to do, because if you're a politician, and I know it's difficult for businesses, but who's going to vote for somebody, who's going to vote for a pay cut? Nobody. It's politically toxic. So the other thing I'd say is that there are mechanisms that are available to allow businesses to make deals with workers called IFAs, and you're allowed to, I guess, flat rate or offset the penalty rates. And they're simple one-page agreements, but nobody seems to want to be interested in hearing about them or talking about them. I've told the business groups, why don't you do a template and put them on your websites? It'll solve a lot of problems. No one will get ripped off, and you know, they'll be able to offset the penalty rates. I've also even told...
Okay, Grace, we've got quite a few questions to get through, and I'm going to move on. I think we've heard from everyone on this subject. Let's move along. A novel suggestion on how to deal with part, anyway, of the health crisis Neil was talking about earlier, from Tina Harris.
Thanks, Tony. After a serious car accident, I've had the unenviable experience of multiple hospitalisations and surgeries. Almost 5 years down the track, I can tell you that our public hospital system is broken and it's getting worse. Knowing that nothing will get done whilst our politicians are able to bypass the mess of public hospitals and go to wonderful private hospitals for their own health treatment, I would like to propose that politicians cannot use private health care whilst in office.
I'd agree with that.
In fact, I would love to see them on waiting lists for 3 years long, and in hospitals where the toilets and wards are filthy and even privacy curtains are in short supply. My question to the panel is, would you agree to use the public health system whilst in office?
Before I go to the politicians, Neil Mitchell raised this earlier in the program. I said we'd come back to it. Go ahead.
I wouldn't use the public hospital system if I could avoid it, and I've got many friends who work in it and they don't use the public hospital system. It is a disgrace. And we've been told since Kevin Rudd said the buck stops with me, that it'll be fixed. Julia Gillard said the buck stopped with her. Will somebody pick up the buck and fix it, for heaven's sake? I mean, we talk about the spending issue. Public hospitals are in a mess. They desperately need help. Your evidence of it. 4-year waiting lists to see surgeons is just ridiculous. In some hospitals, you can't get interpreters, so people come in for a consultation with their doctor and they sit there looking at each other because they can't speak the same language. It is disgraceful. I'd ask both politicians here, well, where does the buck stop? We get the federal-state buck passing, and it's happened again this week. But the other thing is, the allegation is that there's 30% waste in public hospitals. Now, the people who work there don't see it. Where do you get that figure from? 30% waste.
I'm going to go to Catherine King first, and I'll get you to address the very question that was asked. Would you go off private health insurance if you have it and stick with public health insurance if you needed to be hospitalised?
Thanks, Tina.
Public hospitals.
Thanks, Tina. I have used the public hospital in my electorate when I gave birth to my baby, so it's a little while ago. So I certainly think we've got a great public hospital system. However, what's actually happened in the last part of this sort of decade really is that sort of Labor came into government, we had a very long Health and Hospitals Reform Commission. We went and had a look at about what do we do for funding our public hospitals into the future. We've got growing demand, we know. What do we need to do? We came up with agreements with the state and territories because of the nature of our federation. They had to be negotiated. They took a year to do. Basically what happened when this government came to power is they basically took those agreements and said, we're not going to honour those. We're going to fund hospitals according to a lesser formula. What you've now got is state premiers, both Liberal and Labor, saying that is not sustainable. And that's where you get the figure that Labor uses. $57 billion have been cut from our public hospital system, and they are Treasury figures. That is what the government has decided to do. Now, that is clearly not sustainable. We have got growing demand in our public hospitals. One of the really important reforms that we put in place was to start to fund public hospitals on this thing called the efficient price. And that was actually about driving reform.
We've got a clock running over you, Catherine.
It's when you know too much about a particular area. Driving reform. Unfortunately, the government has moved away from that. I think it's got itself in a right mess when it comes to health policy, particularly when it comes to hospitals. Labor wants to do something about it, and we'll have more to say about that. But you are right, our public hospitals should be not just a safety net, they should be the best part of our health system they possibly can be.
Okay, Fiona, Nash, we'll go to you, and if you could please answer the original question first.
I will do that. Our public hospitals, out in rural and regional areas where I am, are by and large fantastic, and I get really sick of people talking down our hospitals and our doctors and our nurses who work so hard out in rural and regional areas. So that's the first point. Second point is, out in rural and regional areas, private hospitals very often aren't even an option. I spent many years ago with pneumonia in our local hospital and they were absolutely fantastic. But in answer to your question, yes. In response to Catherine...
Hang on, which part of the question?
Oh, about if she wants me to go off private health insurance while I'm in Parliament? Sure. That's it.
And how many of your colleagues do you think will go along with that?
That's a question for my colleagues.
Right.
In response to Catherine, briefly, who's accusing the government of cutting funding for hospitals.
I'm not accusing you. Your own Treasury Department. Your own Treasury Department. Your own Treasury Department.
I think it's perfectly reasonable that she has a chance to answer that.
Thank you very much.
Interrupting everybody else.
They're arguing over your health. This is the vicinity of it.
Yeah.
This is what matters, not this political game playing.
So
it's
if I can
people's
have
health.
my response.
You can, and then we might come back to our question.
You can't cut something that never existed. Labor's promises about this funding were far away, imaginary promises.
No, they weren't.
You can't cut.
They
yes,
were not.
they were.
They're in
You
your
never
Catherine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you're going to have to at least let her
never
finish a sentence.
Funded them. They were never budgeted for. They were never funded. We are increasing hospital funding by 21.5% over the next 4 years, $3.3 billion. It is increasing. And I get a bit tired of Labor's scare tactics talking about us cutting something that never actually existed.
These are your own Treasury's numbers. It is a cut to $57 billion.
All right,
now we've premiers saying they cannot sustain that level of funding.
Okay, we've heard that point. I'm going to quickly go back to our questioner, because I think here you see a demonstration of the political problem.
Absolutely. And I would invite you, Fiona, to join me in a little visit to Royal Melbourne, to Footscray Hospital, to Sunshine Hospital. Come with me and I'll show you the areas that I mean, not the nicely cleaned up ones that you see.
Oh, I don't see just nicely cleaned up ones, thank you.
Okay, all right. So, we've been asking the Q&A audience for fresh questions that don't get much coverage in the mainstream media to let ordinary Australians reset the political agenda to some degree. Tonight, the question comes from Taran Singh.
Oh, hi. Before Tony picks up on me, I did vote for Liberals as well. Well, my question is, the debate, and I feel that, is being stifled in the mainstream media about a spectrum of issues, like the rising prospects of instability in Europe, the threats posed to the fundamentals of democracy by Islam. How can democracy even survive without freedom of speech? And secondly, are we giving rise to a new intolerance with promoting this new climate of victimhood and an identity politics by using pretty much moralistic terms like racism, sexism, and Islamophobia, which are not subjective?
Grace Collier, I'll start with you.
Well, look, I understand what you're saying, and we've argued for years now about freedom of speech. And, you know, hurt feelings are just that. They're just hurt feelings. And there are people in our community who think, well, I should be able to say what I want to say, and you know, everybody else should just get over it. And then then we have to draw a line between speech that incites violence and actually really hurts people. So I think somewhere in the middle, we sort of have strayed into territory now where people are scared to say what they think. And that's fairly common. I mean, you know, you're just talking to ordinary people and you use a word and you say, oh, am I allowed to say that word? And, you know, you find yourself searching for words all the time. You say the wrong word and then you think, oh no, did anybody hear that? You know, so especially for people in the media, it's worse. So look, I think we need to try and move back the other way a bit, but also be very, very mindful about making people feel terribly unwelcome and also inciting violence.
I'm going to go back to Tarun Singh for a minute there. You mentioned you're a Liberal. I mean, when you raised this question, did you have in mind in any way the public backlash that happened when Tony Abbott went public and called for a revolution in Islam?
Not really, but that was a part of it. I mean, I feel that it's a question because I come from when I was a kid, I was studying and I had a bus blown up by radical Islamists right next to my school. So I've seen what that brings to a country, and we need to have that debate and not demonize a politician who takes an incentive to start that debate. So it played a part, but
okay,
I guess.
No, thank you for that. Neil Mitchell.
It's a really difficult balance to lead a debate around the sort of issues you're talking about without inciting mindless and destructive hatred. We have a problem. It is essentially a problem of an offshoot of Islam. We have to recognise that, and we have to discuss it and address it without creating victimhood for every Muslim in the country. And that is sometimes where it goes off the rails. Most media reacts in a responsible way. At times that goes too far and we get what I would call the Pauline Hanson effect. Everybody remember Pauline Hanson? When she came along.
How could we forget now? Yeah.
And people suddenly said, yes, she's saying what we want to say. What do you mean we're not allowed to say that? Well, we've gone into a far more sinister area than that now. There are strict, 18C, we haven't even touched on that, but there are strict controls on the media that perhaps people don't understand enough. I was in trouble recently for calling, in a debate about cricket, calling a pom a pom. How stupid's that? I mean, it was seen as a demeaning term, but there are restrictions on that. It is a very difficult area. Most try to act responsibly, but you're right, it's creating an image of fear and suppression.
Catherine King. Oh, sorry, go ahead, briefly.
And that's another good point. I mean, where do we go from there?
Catherine King.
Well, we know where the government tried to go, and it's not something that we supported. I mean, I think we have to be really careful in this debate. I mean, we are a tolerant, inclusive society. We have been built on our multiculturalism. I have, not in my community, but in the community of Bendigo, not far from me, the horrible scenes that we have seen from a group who do not represent us in the whole. Really, because, you know, you cannot say anything other than that they are extraordinarily racist and their agenda is one of hate. I think we have to be very careful in this debate, and I understand the importance of free speech, of course we do, but it is, you know, that old, very important saying is that, you know, I defend your right to free speech, but I also defend mine to call you a racist if that's what you're being, and to make sure that we have a tolerant and inclusive society, because that is who we are. And it's important, particularly for those in our Muslim community, that they do feel included in our community. And sometimes it's not just speech, but the actions, it can be the actions of politicians or the actions of media, can actually be counterproductive in making sure that they do feel included in our society.
Fiona Nash, the questioner asked, the final question was, are we creating a new form of intolerance?
I hope we're not. And I have to say, I agree with Catherine when she talks about us being an inclusive and tolerant society. And that's what we are, and that's what we're, I think, by and large, as Australians, focused on seeing continue. But I think Grace and Neil have both used the word that really is where we need to focus, and that's about balance. Of course, we need to have freedom of speech, but neither should we accept behaviour that, as part of that tolerant and inclusive society, we just know is not part of that type of society that we want to be.
Very briefly, and touching on the Tony Abbott issue again, when he called for a religious revolution in Islam, he said that all cultures are not equal. Do you think that's right?
I think that's a question for Tony.
Nicely handled.
Yeah.
Dave?
No, I mean, yeah, I disagree with Tony's analysis there, but I find myself agreeing with most of the what's been said at this end of the table. I mean, the one great thing about this country is our capacity to speak up. Trade union movement is renowned for people wanting to speak up on key issues, but there is a line that can be crossed, and unfortunately we see that line being crossed in workplaces quite often. And it gets worse when we've got high-profile public people that are expressing a view that incites that, and that permeates all the way to the top into our communities, and we see it play out in our workplaces. So I'm for, we've got free speech, but there is a limit. There is a limit.
And I'm afraid, thank you very much. Hold your applause, because that is all we have time for tonight. So please thank our panel: Grace Collier, Dave Oliver, Fiona Nash, Catherine King and Neil Mitchell. And thank you very much to this great audience. We are looking forward to getting back to Melbourne again soon, and we will be quite a few times during the course of the year. So anyway, next Monday, back in Sydney, Q&A will be joined by the Deputy Leader of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce, who may soon step up to a new job, rising Labor MP, Terry Butler, prominent Green Senator, Sarah Hanson-Young, and the man they call a beacon of light in a politically correct world, Conservative commentator Mark Stein. Until next week's Q&A, good night.